How did Tulsi Gabbard systematically dismantle Nancy Pelosi's $413 million empire in a single, devastating Senate hearing? I made you, Director Gabbard. Nancy Pelosi said it the way she said everything, quietly, precisely, with the particular authority of a woman who had been the most powerful person in the United States House of Representatives for 16 of the last 20 years. She was 86 years old, she was worth $250 million, and she was looking at the woman she had once called a star the way a mother looks at a daughter who has changed her last name. What you are about to hear is not a political debate. It is a reckoning between two women who used to be on the same side, one who built the other's career, and one who walked away from it. The woman who stayed is worth $250 million. The woman who left is the Director of National Intelligence. And the question between them has nothing to do with policy. This confrontation goes beyond mere politics. This one is deeply personal. The chairman recognized Pelosi for her questioning period. Nancy Pelosi did not stand. She had commanded the House of Representatives from a seated position for 16 years. And 435 members had learned, some quickly, some painfully, that the woman in the Speaker's chair did not raise her voice because she did not need to. Director Gabbard, thank you for your testimony today. Before I ask my questions about intelligence community operations, I want to address something that I believe the American people deserve to hear. Her voice was measured, cold, the voice of a woman who had spent 40 years in Congress and had learned that anger was a luxury she could not afford and did not need. I made you, Director Gabbard. She let the sentence sit in the hearing room. In 2012, I stood at the podium of the Democratic National Convention in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I introduced you to the American people. I called you an emerging star. Those were my words. I chose them carefully, the way I choose all my words carefully, because words spoken from the Speaker's podium carry weight that cannot be taken back. I brought you to Washington. I welcomed you into the Democratic caucus. I gave you a platform at the convention that most first-term members would have waited 10 years to receive. I did this because I believed in you, because I saw a young woman, a C-0 MBOT veteran, a Hindu, a Samoan American, who represented everything the Democratic Party should be. And you repaid me by joining the man I impeached. She adjusted her reading glasses. The gesture was unhurried, the gesture of a woman who had all the time in the world. You met with Bashar al-Assad in Damascus, a W@R.CR, Meinl who used Cal, WEP0NS on children. You defended Edward Snowden, a man who stole classified intelligence and fled to Vladimir Putin. You repeated Russian talking points about Ukraine on national television. And then you walked into the Republican Party and accepted a cabinet position from Donald Trump, the man I impeached twice for CR, mis against the Constitution of the United States. I impeached him, Director Gabbard, twice. I stood on the floor of the House of Representatives and held him accountable for inciting an insurrection against American democracy. And you, the woman I called a star, went to work for him. So my question today is not about the intelligence community's operations. My question is about you. Specifically, how does a woman who took an oath to defend the Constitution serve a president who at CKT'd it? And how does she sleep at night knowing that the woman who gave her a career is sitting 12 feet away, watching her betray everything that career was supposed to represent? Adam Schiff nodded from his seat, the slow, deliberate nod of a former prosecutor agreeing with a witness. Warner did not nod. Warner was looking at his notes. The chairman turned to Gabbard. Director Gabbard, you may respond. Tulsi Gabbard looked at Nancy Pelosi for 3 seconds before she spoke. Not at the cameras, not at the committee. At Pelosi. She looked at her the way soldiers look at people they have known for a long time and are about to say something to that cannot be unsaid. Madame Pelosi, I heard everything you said, and I want to acknowledge something before I respond, because I think it matters. You did call me an emerging star in Charlotte in 2012. I was 29 years old. I had just come back from my second deployment. I was standing on a stage at a national convention in front of 15,000 people, and the Speaker of the House was introducing me. I remember the moment. I have never forgotten it, and I want you to know, because I think this is important, and I think the people watching at home deserve to hear it, that I was grateful. I was genuinely grateful. You gave a young veteran from Hawaii a chance that most first-term members never get, and I will not stand here today and pretend that your support did not matter to me. It did. But Madame Pelosi, you said you made me. I want to respectfully disagree with that characterization. You did not make me. The United States Marine Corps made me. 2C0 MBAT deployments made me. The soldiers I served with in Iraq, some of whom died and did not come home, made me. You gave me a microphone. You did not give me the things I said into it. And you did not give me the conscience that told me in 2016 that the Democratic National Committee was rigging its own primary against Bernie Sanders. You did not give me the conscience that told me in 2019 that our party's foreign policy was getting soldiers K, LOD, in W, at RS, that had no strategy and no exit. And you did not give me the conscience that told me in 2022 that I could no longer remain in a party that had become, and these are my words which I stand by, an elitist cabal of W at R mongers driven by cowardly wokeness. I left. Madame Pelosi, I did not betray you, I left. There is a difference, and the difference matters. Now, Madame Pelosi, you asked me how I sleep at night. I am going to answer that question. But first, I want to talk about something I remember from inside the Democratic caucus. Because I was inside, Madame Pelosi, for 8 years, and I remember things. Gabbard's voice shifted. It was no longer the formal military tone of a DNI delivering testimony. It was quieter, more personal. The voice of someone who had been in the room and was now describing what the room looked like from the inside. I remember the caucus meetings, Madame Pelosi. I remember sitting in those meetings in HVC room 215 on the basement level of the Capitol Visitor Center, where the House Democratic Caucus met every Tuesday and Thursday morning when the House was in session. I remember the coffee was always bad, and the pastries were always stale, and the chairs were always too close together. And I remember watching you, Madame Pelosi, not because I was spying, because I was learning. I was a 29-year-old first-term Congresswoman, and you were the Speaker of the House. And I was watching you the way a young officer watches a commanding general, not for what they say in public, but for what they do when they think no one important is paying attention. I watched you check your phone during those meetings, Madame Pelosi. I watched you send text messages while junior members were speaking. I didn't think much of it at the time. Speakers are busy. They have 1,000 things to manage. But I remember it now, because I now know what some of those text messages were about. Madame Pelosi, your husband Paula's investment portfolio has returned over 700% since 2014. 700%. The S&P 500, the benchmark that the best professional investors in America are measured against, returned approximately 230% during the same period. Your husband beat every hedge fund in America, every single one. Ray Dalio at Bridgewater, Ken Griffin at Citadel, Steve Cohen at .72. Your husband, a real estate investor from San Francisco with no formal training in securities analysis, outperformed all of them by 300%. In 2024 alone, your family's portfolio returned between 54 and 92%. depending on which financial analysis you read. The S&P returned 23% that year. Your family's returns were roughly 4 times the market average. And in January of 2025, 13 months ago, your husband purchased 50 call options on a company called Tempest AI. The stock was trading at approximately $35. Within 1 month of your disclosure filing, Tempest stock rose to $89, a 154% increase in 30 days. She paused. Madame Pelosi, I sat in classified briefings with you. I sat in the same room with you when the House Intelligence Committee received briefings on artificial intelligence policy, on healthcare technology regulation, on federal contracts with AI companies. I was in those rooms. I remember who was in those rooms. And I remember that the topics discussed in those rooms, the companies discussed, the regulatory frameworks discussed, the federal contracts discussed, had a very interesting habit of aligning with your husband's subsequent investment decisions. I am not accusing you of insider trading. That is a legal conclusion, and I am not a prosecutor. I am the Director of National Intelligence. My job is to identify patterns. And Madam Pelosi, a not told dollars and dollars, 700% returns, while sitting in classified briefings, is a pattern. Tom Cotton leaned into his microphone. Director Gabbard, I want to add a factual point for the record. In January of 2023, Senator Josh Hawley introduced a bill called the Pelosi Act, the Preventing Elected Leaders from Owning Securities and Investments Act. The bill was named after you, Representative Pelosi. Not symbolically, literally. Senator Hawley chose the acronym specifically because your family's trading activity had become the most visible example in America of potential conflicts of interest between congressional service and personal investment. The bill has been reintroduced in 2024 and 2025 with bipartisan support. President Trump has expressed support for the legislation. The fact that a bill designed to prevent congressional insider trading is literally named after a sitting member of Congress is, I believe, relevant to the record of this hearing. Pelosi's response was immediate. Her voice did not change. Nancy Pelosi's voice never changed. But there was something underneath the control that had not been there before. Something sharp. Director Gabbard, I do not own stocks. I have never owned stocks. My husband is a private businessman who makes his own investment decisions. I have no involvement in his portfolio, and I have stated this publicly on the record dozens of times over the past 4 decades. This is a manufactured controversy designed to distract from the fact that you, the Director of National Intelligence, met with AW at R. Meinl in Damascus, and are now lecturing me about ethics. You just watched a former Democratic insider, a woman who sat in the same classified briefings as Nancy Pelosi, lay out 700% returns. The Pelosi Act and Tempest AI on live C-SPAN, and Pelosi's response was, I don't own stocks. Consider that defense carefully, because what comes next is the exact number that completely changes the trajectory of the entire hearing. Madame Pelosi, you said you do not own stocks. I accept that statement. Your husband owns the stocks. You sign the financial disclosures. That is a distinction. Whether it is a meaningful distinction is something I will leave to the American people watching at home to decide for themselves. But I want to talk about something that is not a question of stock ownership. It is a question of math. You entered Congress in 1987, 39 years ago. Your congressional salary, which has been public information for every one of those 39 years, has ranged from approximately $89,000 in your first year to $223,000 as Speaker. Let us be generous and assume an average salary of $150,000 per year over 39 years. That is approximately $5.88 million in gross income from congressional service before taxes. Your family's estimated net worth, as reported by the New York Post and multiple financial outlets in 2024, is approximately $413 million. She let the number sit. $413 million. Madame Pelosi, on a congressional salary in 39 years. You and your husband own a mansion in the Pacific Heights neighborhood of San Francisco, valued at between $10 and $20 million. You own a vineyard in Street Helena, Napa Valley, valued at between $5 and $25 million. You own 2 commercial buildings in San Francisco. You own a town home in Northern California. Your husband's company, Financial Leasing Services, is a San Francisco-based real estate and venture capital firm. He owns stakes in Apple, NVIDIA, Amazon, Alphabet, Broadcom, Tempest AI, and Vistra. His NVIDIA position alone, which represents 22% of your portfolio, has appreciated 680% in the last 3 years. Madame Pelosi, I served in the United States military for 20 years. My annual salary as a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve is approximately $18,000. The people watching this hearing at home, the truck drivers, the nurses, the teachers, the electricians, the veterans, they make between $40,000 and $80,000 a year. They pay their mortgages. They carry credit card balances. They worry about their children's college tuition. They check their retirement accounts and hope the numbers go up, and know that the numbers sometimes go down. And then they turn on C-SPAN, and they see a congresswoman with a $413 million net worth built on a congressional salary tell them that her husband's 700% returns are just good investing. And they know, because the American people are not stupid, Madam Pelosi. Despite what the Democratic establishment seems to believe, they know that nobody beats every hedge fund in America for a decade by accident. I do not have to accuse you of anything, Madam Pelosi. The math accuses you 700% versus 230. $413 million on a congressional salary. The Pelosi Act named after you? The numbers are the accusation. I am just the person reading them out loud. Schiff leaned forward. Director Gabbard, this is a character assassination of a woman who has served this country for nearly 4 decades. Representative Pelosi's husband is a successful businessman who has been making investments since long before she entered Congress. The suggestion that a congresswoman's husband cannot be a successful investor without insider information is sexist and demeaning. Senator Schiff, Gabbard did not raise her voice. I am a woman. I am a woman of color. I am a C-0 MBAT veteran. Calling my question sexist does not make $413 million on a congressional salary less remarkable. And it does not make 700% returns less unusual. If anything, Senator, the fact that you are reaching for the word sexist to defend investment returns suggests that you do not have a better word available. Schiff did not respond. $413 million on a congressional salary, 700% returns, beating every hedge fund in America. And when Adam Schiff called the question sexist, a female C-0 MBAT veteran shut him down in one sentence. Those numbers undeniably require explaining, because the former speaker is about to fight back, and she is going to land some very real punches. Nancy Pelosi had been in Congress for 39 years. She had survived Newt Gingrich. She had survived the Tea Party. She had survived Donald Trump twice. She had survived being second in the presidential line of succession during a pandemic, an insurrection, and the most divisive political era since the Civil War. She had not survived all of that, by losing arguments in hearing rooms. She leaned forward. Her voice was still controlled, but the control was no longer effortless. It was deliberate, the kind of control that requires concentration to maintain. Director Gabbard, since you want to discuss records, let me discuss yours. In January of 2017, you, a sitting Democratic Congresswoman, a member of the Armed Services Committee, a woman I had personally elevated within our party, traveled secretly to Damascus, Syria, and met privately with Bashar al-Assad, AD, Sec-tator, a man who used SAR, NG at S, on children in Ghouta. Children, Director Gabbard, children younger than the ones you claim to care about. A man who dropped barrel B, 0 MBS, on hospitals, on schools, on civilian shelters where families were hiding from his army. You met with him, you sat across from him, you shook his hand, and you called it a fact-finding mission. The State Department condemned your visit. Your own Democratic leadership, which included me, Director Gabbard, the same woman who had called you a star 4 years earlier, condemned your visit. The editorial boards of the Washington Post, the New York Times, and a dozen other newspapers condemned your visit. You went anyway, because Tulsi Gabbard has always believed that Tulsi Gabbard knows better than everyone else in the room. You defended Edward Snowden, a man who stole the most sensitive classified intelligence in the history of the National Security Agency and delivered it to Vladimir Putin's Russia, where he lives today, Director Gabbard, as a Russian citizen under Russian protection, in a country that is currently waging war against a democratic ally of the United States. You are now the Director of National Intelligence, the person in charge of protecting the very secrets that Snowden stole. The irony is not lost on anyone in this room, Director Gabbard. You are guarding the vault that your hero robbed. In 2022, you said on national television that the war in Ukraine could have been prevented if America had acknowledged Russia's legitimate security concerns, word for word, the Kremlin's position. Word for word, the talking points that Russian state television broadcasts every night to justify the invasion of a sovereign democracy. You repeated Putin's justification for a war that has killed hundreds of thousands of people on American television in American English, wearing an American flag pin. And then you joined the party of the man who was impeached for withholding military aid from the very country Russia invaded. And in 2019, and I want the American people to remember this because it matters, you stood on a Democratic debate stage and at CKT Kamala Harris. You at CKT, a woman who went on to become the Vice President of the United States. You at CKT her record as Attorney General of California. You said she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about it when she was asked if she had ever smoked marijuana herself. You used that line to destroy her presidential campaign, and then you left the party and went to work for the man Kamala Harris was running against. And now, after meeting dictators, defending traitors, repeating Russian propaganda, destroying a fellow Democratic woman's presidential campaign, and switching parties for a cabinet position, you sit across from me and lecture me about ethics. She removed her glasses, set them on the table, and looked directly at Gabbard. Director Gabbard, I broke the glass ceiling. I was the first female Speaker of the House in the history of the United States of America. I passed the Affordable Care Act, which gave health care to 20 million Americans who had none. I passed the Dodd-Frank Act, which reformed Wall Street after the worst financial crisis since the Great Depression. I held a sitting president accountable for crimes against the Constitution twice. I served this country in elected office for 39 years without a single ethics violation finding against me. What have you done, Director Gabbard. You met with a dictator. You defended a traitor. You destroyed a fellow woman's campaign. You quit your party. And you took a job from the man I impeached. That is not a career. That is a cautionary tale about what happens when ambition exceeds loyalty. Schiff stood and applauded. 2 Democratic staffers in the back of the room followed. For 20 seconds, the energy in the hearing room belonged to Nancy Pelosi. She had reminded the room and the American people watching at home that she was not a minor political figure being ambushed by a junior appointee. She was Nancy Pelosi. She had broken barriers that no woman in American history had broken before her. She had wielded more political power than any woman in the history of the Republic. And she was not going to sit quietly while a woman she had mentored lectured her about stock trades. For 20 seconds, the room belonged to the former speaker. It was the strongest moment Nancy Pelosi would have for the rest of the hearing. Gabbard waited for the applause to end. She did not interrupt. She did not shift in her chair. She waited with the particular stillness of a soldier who has learned that the most important moments in any confrontation happen in the silence between the last shot and the next one. When the room was quiet, she spoke. Her voice was different now, softer, not weaker, softer, the way a voice gets when the person speaking has stopped performing and started talking. Madame Pelosi, that was a powerful statement. I want to respond to it carefully, because what you said deserves a careful response. First, Assad. I met with Assad. I reported the meeting publicly. It was covered by every major network. I went because I wanted to understand the conflict in Syria from every side, including the side that America was fighting against. Because that is what diplomacy requires. Understanding your adversary, Dennis Kucinich, a liberal Democrat, made the same trip before me. I did not endorse Assad. I did not defend his Krar. Anez, I said the W&R in Syria was more complicated than the Washington foreign policy establishment wanted to admit, and I stand by that. Second, Snowden. At my Senate confirmation hearing, I declined to call him a traitor. I said the situation was complex. The United States Senate then confirmed me 52-48 after reviewing my complete classified background, including every statement I have ever made about Snowden. If the Senate, with full access to my record, determined I was fit to lead the intelligence community, I will defer to their judgment. Third, Kamala Harris. You mentioned the debate. Yes, I challenged Vice President Harris on her record as Attorney General. I did so with specific factual claims about her prosecution record. She did not dispute the facts. She disputed the framing. That is what debates are for, Madam Pelosi. If you believe that a woman challenging another woman's record in a presidential debate is disqualifying, then you believe that women cannot be held to the same standards as men. And I do not believe that. I have never believed that. And I do not think you believe it either. Now, you asked what I have done. I'll tell you. I enlisted in the United States military at the age of 21. I deployed to Iraq twice. I served in a medical unit in a C0 MBAT zone where soldiers came in on stretchers, and some of them died and did not leave on stretchers because they did not leave at all. I earned the C0 MBAT medical badge. I held the hands of soldiers who were dying and could not find the words to tell their mothers. That is what I did. Madame Pelosi, you broke the glass ceiling. I acknowledge that. I respect it. I have always respected it. But I want to point out something about the glass ceiling that I think matters. The glass ceiling you broke was the ceiling above the Speaker's chair. It was the ceiling above the most powerful office in the House of Representatives. It was the ceiling above a job that pays $223,000 a year, and that in your case coincided with a family net worth that grew from approximately $16 million when you became Speaker in 2007 to $413 million today, 18 years, 16 million to 413 million. Madam Pelosi, the women I served with in Iraq did not break glass ceilings. They broke down doors in body armor in 120-degree heat for $42,000 a year. And when they came home, they did not come home to mansions in Pacific Heights or vineyards in Napa Valley. They came home to VA hospitals with 6-month waiting lists and disability claims that took 2 years to process. You asked me why I left the Democratic Party. I am going to tell you, not the version I put in my video in October of 2022. The real reason, the reason I have never said on television, because it is personal and because it involves you. I left because I watched you get richer every year while the people I served with got nothing. I sat in the same caucus meetings as you for 8 years. Madam Pelosi, I watched the Democratic Party become the party of Silicon Valley, of Wall Street, of venture capital, of stock options, and call options, and NVIDIA, and Tempest AI. I watched it become the party of $400 million net worths and Pacific Heights mansions and Napa Valley vineyards. And I watched it stop being the party of the soldiers I served with in Iraq, and the families I came home to Hawaii, and the working people who used to believe that the Democratic Party was their party. That is why I left. Not because of Donald Trump, not because of Russia, not because of Assad. I left because the Democratic Party became your party, Madam Pelosi, the party of people who get richer while they lecture the rest of America about equality, and I could not be part of that anymore. And then Mark Warner spoke. The Democratic vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee had been silent for the entire hearing. Warner was 67 years old. He was worth approximately $200 million. Money he had made in telecommunications before entering politics. He understood wealth. He understood investing. He understood what it looked like when returns were earned legitimately and what it looked like when they were not. He leaned forward. Mr. Chairman, I want to make a brief statement for the record. The room went still when Mark Warner spoke. During Intelligence Committee hearings, people listened, because Warner rarely spoke without having calculated exactly what he was going to say and exactly what the consequences of saying it would be. I am a Democrat. I am the vice chairman of this committee, and I am a businessman who made his money before I came to the Senate in the private sector in telecommunications, where my investment returns were a matter of public record and subject to SEC oversight. He paused, looked at Pelosi. I have the highest respect for Representative Pelosi's service to this country. She is the most consequential Speaker of the House in modern history. I believe that. But I cannot sit here as a businessman, as someone who understands financial markets, as someone who has generated investment returns in the private sector, and pretend that 700% returns over a decade while serving in Congress and sitting in classified briefings do not require explanation. 700%. Representative Pelosi. The best hedge funds in America, run by people whose full-time job is investing, who employ hundreds of analysts, who use the most sophisticated technology available, the best of them average 12 to 15% annually. Over a decade, that compounds to approximately 300% on the high end. Your family achieved 700%, more than double the best professionals in the world. While your husband's full-time job is not investing. While his wife was sitting in classified briefings about the very sectors he was investing in. I am not making an accusation. I am stating that the numbers require explanation. And my husband makes his own decisions is not an explanation. It is a sentence. And the difference between a sentence and an explanation is the difference between this hearing ending today and this hearing continuing into next month. I will also note for the record that I say this as a man who is worth approximately $200 million. I know what legitimate investment returns look like because I earned them in the private sector before I entered public service, without access to classified government briefings about the companies I was investing in. My returns were good. They were not 700%. Nobody's returns are 700% unless they know something the rest of the market does not. The room absorbed this. The Democratic vice chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, a Democrat, a wealthy businessman, a man who understood money the way doctors understand medicine, had just said on live C-SPAN that Nancy Pelosi's stock returns did not look like legitimate returns. He had said it carefully. He had said it mathematically, and he had said it with the particular credibility of a man who was rich enough to know the difference between skill and information. Pelosi turned to Warner. Her eyes carried something that was not anger. It was colder than anger. It was the look of a woman who had spent 40 years building a political operation, who had raised money for every Democrat in the room, who had delivered committee chairmanships and campaign funds and political futures, and who had just been challenged by one of the people she had helped elevate. Senator Warner, I would expect that kind of question from the other side of the aisle. I did not expect it from you. Warner's voice did not change. Representative Pelosi, I am not asking a partisan question. I am asking a mathematical one, and mathematics does not have a party. Pelosi stared at him for 3 seconds, the stare of a woman who had ended careers with less effort than it took to fold a napkin. Warner held her gaze. He did not look away. He was worth $200 million, and he had made it himself. And he did not owe Nancy Pelosi his fortune or his courage. The Democratic vice chairman, a man worth $200 million himself, just told Nancy Pelosi that her investment returns require explanation. Her own party, her own committee, on live television, and Pelosi's response was not a defense. It was a warning. I didn't expect that from you. The math clearly does not add up here, because Director Gabbard is about to deliver the ultimate, devastating final line. Madame Pelosi, I want to close with something that connects the numbers we have been discussing to a broader pattern, because I think the pattern is what matters most. In August of 2020, the city of San Francisco was under COVID lockdown. Restaurants were closed. Gyms were closed. Churches were closed. Small businesses were closed. The people of San Francisco were told by their government, by their public health officials, by their elected representatives, that they could not leave their homes except for essential purposes. They could not visit their aging parents in nursing homes. They could not attend their children's schools. They could go to church on Sunday. And in August of 2020, you walked into a hair salon in San Francisco without a mask, in violation of the city's lockdown orders, and received a wash and blow dry. The salon's security camera captured the footage. The footage was broadcast on national television. And when you were asked about it, your response was that you had been set up by the salon owner. You were set up, Madame Pelosi, by the salon owner, while small business owners across San Francisco were going bankrupt because of the lockdown rules. You supported rules that you yourself did not follow. In February of 2020, during the State of the Union address, you tore up a copy of President Trump's speech on live television, behind his back, on camera, while the nation watched. You did this because you believed, and I am not disputing your sincerity, that Trump was unfit for office, but the gesture was broadcast to every living room in America. And many of the Americans watching, including the soldiers I had served with, including the veterans in my district in Hawaii, saw the Speaker of the House tear up the speech of their Commander-in-Chief, not in a press conference, not in a statement on the floor of the House, on live television, in a gesture that was designed to humiliate rather than to hold accountable. And in May of 2022, while you were fighting to maintain your Democratic majority in the House. Your husband Paul was arrested in Napa County, California, for driving under the influence. He was driving a 2021 Porsche. He caused an accident at an intersection. His blood alcohol was 0.82, above the legal limit. He pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 5 days in jail, a $6,800 fine, and 3 years of probation. I want to connect these events, Madam Pelosi, because I think they are connected. Not by conspiracy, but by character. Salon visit during lockdown, tearing up a speech on live television, DUI in a Porsche in Napa Valley, $413 million in net worth, 700%, stock returns. The Pelosi Act, literally named after you. These are not isolated incidents, Madam Pelosi. They are a pattern, and the pattern has a name. The American people have a phrase for it. They say it at their kitchen tables, in their break rooms, at their church potlucks. The phrase is, rules for thee, but not for me. That is what the American people see when they look at your record, Madam Pelosi, a woman who locked them in their homes and then went to get her hair done, a woman who told them to follow the rules and then watched her husband drive Dr. Times NK in a Porsche, a woman who preached equality while building a $400 million fortune on a congressional salary. I served in the military for 20 years. In the military, the rules apply to everyone. The general follows the same rules of engagement as the private. The colonel files the same after-action reports as the lieutenant. There is no rules for thee. There is one set of rules for everyone. That is what I believed when I was a Democrat, Madam Pelosi, and that is what I still believe. The difference is that I stopped believing the Democratic Party believed it. Madame Pelosi, I want to end with something personal. Because this hearing has been personal from the beginning, from the moment you said I made you, and I think it deserves a personal ending. You called me an emerging star in 2012. You were right, I was emerging, and I spent the next 10 years inside your party. Emerging, watching, learning, understanding how the Democratic establishment operated. I saw the fundraisers. I saw the donor calls. I saw who got committee assignments and why. I saw who got primary opponents funded against them when they voted the wrong way. I saw the machinery, and I saw a party that talked about the working class at press conferences and served the donor class in private. A party that talked about inequality while its leaders became millionaires and then sent a millionaires. A party that called itself the Party of the People, while the people it claimed to represent could not afford groceries. You made me, Madam Pelosi? No, you showed me. You showed me what happens when power becomes its own purpose, when service becomes a brand, when a congressional salary becomes a launching pad for a $400 million fortune, and when I saw enough, when I could not unsee what I had seen, I left. I did not leave quietly. I published a video. I explained my reasons. I gave up my seat, my committee assignments, my donor network, my future in the Democratic Party. I gave up everything you had given me because what you had given me came with conditions I could no longer accept. Madam Pelosi, you asked me how I sleep at night. I sleep fine. I sleep in government housing. I drive a government car. My net worth is a matter of public record, and it does not require a team of accountants to explain. How do you sleep, Madam Pelosi? Nancy Pelosi began to respond. Director Gabbard, I have served this country for 39 years with integrity and... She stopped. The word integrity had started to come out. She had used the word 10,000 times in 39 years of congressional service. She had used it in press conferences, in floor speeches, in caucus meetings, in fundraising emails, in campaign advertisements. It was one of her standard words, part of the vocabulary that every career politician develops over decades, the collection of reliable words that can be deployed in any situation to sound like something important is being said. But this time, the word stopped in her throat. Not because she could not say it. She could say it. She had said it 10,000 times. She stopped because she heard herself about to say it. Integrity. While the number 413 million was still hanging in the hearing room air, and while Mark Warner's phrase, "The numbers require explanation," was still echoing off the acoustic panels, and while every camera in the room was pointed at her face, and while the woman she had mentored 14 years ago was sitting 12 feet away watching her, waiting for her to finish the sentence. Nancy Pelosi had never, in 39 years of congressional service, stopped herself in the middle of a sentence. She had been interrupted thousands of times, by colleagues, by reporters, by protesters, by presidents, but she had never interrupted herself. She had never heard her own words forming, and decided mid-syllable that the word she was about to say would cost more than the silence that would replace it. She closed her mouth. She opened it. She closed it again. The hearing room watched. Tom Cotton watched. Warner watched. Schiff watched. And Schiff, who had known Pelosi for 20 years, who had served as her Intelligence Committee chairman, who had been her most loyal lieutenant through 2 impeachment trials, recognized the pause for what it was. He had never seen it before in 20 years. He had never seen Nancy Pelosi stop herself. 3 seconds of silence. Gabbard spoke. Quiet. 8 words. The emerging star remembers everything, Madame Pelosi. She looked at the chairman. I yield my time. The chairman gavelled. The hearing closed. The committee notes the financial disclosure questions raised during today's testimony and will refer them to the appropriate oversight bodies for review. The committee also notes Vice Chairman Warner's statement regarding the need for explanation of investment returns by members of Congress. This hearing stands adjourned. Adam Schiff left first. He gathered his papers quickly. Too quickly for a former prosecutor who usually moved with deliberate calm. He walked past Gabbard's witness table without looking at her. He walked past the press gaggle in the hallway without stopping. A reporter from CNN called out a question. Schiff kept walking. The reporter noted that this was the first time in her 6 years covering the Senate that Adam Schiff had declined to comment after an Intelligence Committee hearing. Mark Warner left second. He did not walk past Pelosi. He took the long way around the horseshoe table, the extra 12 steps that allowed him to avoid passing her seat. It was a small gesture, the kind of gesture that only people who have worked in the Senate for decades would notice. The press did not notice. Pelosi noticed. She watched him take the long way around. And her face did not change. Because Nancy Pelosi's face never changed. But she shifted the position of her reading glasses on the table by 1/4 of an inch, which was, for Nancy Pelosi, the equivalent of slamming a door. Nancy Pelosi was the last person on the Democratic side to leave. She did not sit alone at the table for 90 seconds. She did not slump. She did not look defeated. Nancy Pelosi had never looked defeated in her life, and she was not going to start in a Senate hearing room at the age of 86. She stood up immediately after the gavel. She straightened her jacket. She picked up her reading glasses and placed them in their case with the precise, practiced movements of a woman who had been putting her reading glasses in their case after hearings for 39 years. She walked out through the main doors, not the side door. Nancy Pelosi did not use side doors. She walked through the main doors, past the cameras, past the reporters, past the microphones. She walked with her chin up and her shoulders back, and the particular pace that she had maintained for 4 decades. Not fast, not slow. the pace of a woman who had decided a long time ago that no one would ever see her rush, and no one would ever see her hesitate. But the cameras, which had been pointed at her face since the gavel fell, caught something in her eyes that had not been there at the beginning of the hearing. It was small, it was brief, most viewers would not have noticed it. But the political reporters, who had covered Pelosi for decades, would notice it when they reviewed the footage that evening, and they would describe it in their articles the next morning as the first time we've ever seen Nancy Pelosi look like she was calculating the cost of a sentence she didn't finish. Tom Cotton shook Gabbard's hand at the witness table. Director, Gabbard. Senator, 700%. The math is the math, Senator. It is. Gabbard picked up her briefing folder. She straightened the American flag pin on her lapel. She walked out through the main doors, past the cameras, past the questions. She did not comment. The Director of National Intelligence walked to the elevator at the end of the hall, and the doors closed, and she went back to work. Tulsi Gabbard sat at her desk at the Liberty Crossing Intelligence Campus in McLean, Virginia, at 7:15 the following morning. On the desk, the President's daily brief, a secure phone, a cup of black coffee that had been brewed by the night watch officer at 6:45, the overnight cables from 3 CIA stations that required her review before the morning interagency call. The hearing clip was at 39 million views and climbing. The phrase 700% was trending on 3 social media platforms. A financial analyst at Goldman Sachs had posted a thread at 2 inches the morning, breaking down the Pelosi family's returns against every publicly tracked hedge fund portfolio since 2014. The thread confirmed Gabbard's numbers. It had been viewed 4 million times by dawn. Nancy Pelosi's office had released a statement at midnight, calling the hearing a partisan spectacle orchestrated by Trump's intelligence apparatus. The statement had been written by a communications staffer who had been with Pelosi for 11 years. It was well crafted. It hit every talking point. It referred to Gabbard as a former Democrat who has proven through her actions that her loyalty has always been for sale. It did not mention 700% returns, or $413 million, or the word integrity that had stopped in Pelosi's throat mid-syllable. The statement had 18,000 retweets by morning. Gabbard had not read the statement. She had not read the Goldman Sachs thread. She had not checked the view count. She had read the overnight cables from NATO's eastern flank instead, because the overnight cables were her job, and her job did not pause for hearings, or statements, or clips, or trending phrases. She opened the President's daily brief. Page 1, Iran. Page 2, China. Page 3, Russia. Somewhere in Pacific Heights, in a mansion that was worth more than most Americans would earn in 10 lifetimes, a former Speaker of the House was awake. She had been awake since 4:30. The lights in the upstairs study had been on since then. The neighbors on the street had noticed. Because Nancy Pelosi was not a woman who left her lights on at 4:30, unless she was working on something, or unless something was working on her. But the Director of National Intelligence did not know about the lights in Pacific Heights because the DNI's job was not to monitor the sleeping habits of former speakers. The DNI's job was to read the PDB and brief the President and protect the country from threats that had nothing to do with stock portfolios or Napa Valley vineyards or the particular silence that fills a hearing room when a woman who has never stopped herself in 39 years stops herself for the first time. She picked up her pen and went back to work. The emerging star had work to do. The woman who had made her was someone else's problem now. If you made it this far, you just watched the woman Nancy Pelosi, once called an emerging star, sit across from her in a Senate hearing room and dismantle her entire financial record. 700% returns. $413 million. the Pelosi Act, Tempest AI, the salon visit, the DUI in the Porsche, the vineyard in Napa, using nothing but memory, math, and the particular popular authority of a woman who had been inside the Democratic Party for 8 years and remembered everything she saw. You watched the Democratic vice chairman of the Intelligence Committee tell his own party's most powerful woman that her numbers require explanation. You watched Adam Schiff call the question sexist and get shut down in one sentence by a female C0 MBAT veteran. And you watched Nancy Pelosi, the woman who had never stopped herself in 39 years of congressional service, stop herself in the middle of a sentence because the word she was about to say would have cost more than the silence. If you believe that 700% returns on a congressional salary require more than my husband makes his own decisions, then you understand the gravity of this. The woman Pelosi mentored turned out to be the one person in Washington who remembered everything. Everyone who has ever watched a politician get richer while telling them to follow the rules knows the truth. Because rules for thee, but not for me, is not a governing philosophy. It is a full confession. The emerging star remembers absolutely everything. When those in power use their service merely as a stepping stone to unimaginable wealth, can we ever truly trust the laws they write to govern us?